The unexpected asset. Captain Ilara Rise stood at the viewport of the Galactic Alliance flagship Intrepid, her dark eyes reflecting the vast starfield before her. At 32 years old, she was the youngest human ever assigned to the Alliance's strategic command, and certainly the first to serve aboard their flagship. The 12-foot-tall Andronian Admiral Xel had made his skepticism abundantly clear when she reported for duty 3 months ago. "You understand, Captain Rise, that your presence here is merely a political gesture," he had said, mandibles clicking with barely contained disdain. "The Treaty of Sol requires human representation in our command structure, but do not mistake this assignment for actual authority." Ilara had simply nodded, keeping her expression neutral as she replied, "I understand perfectly, Admiral." Now, as the Alliance's 30-vessel armada moved through the Cygnus expanse, Ilara watched the officers around her, representing 17 different species from across the galaxy, working with practiced efficiency. None of them bothered to consult her on anything beyond the most trivial matters. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 20 years ago. In the eyes of species who had navigated the stars for millennia, they were barely more than clever primates. The tranquility of the bridge shattered as alarm klaxons blared. The holographic display at the center of the command deck flickered to life, showing a massive formation of ships emerging from hyperspace directly in their path. "Scorpius vessels detected," shouted the Tellurian sensor officer, his crystalline body pulsing with alarmed light patterns. 47 warships, heavy configuration. Admiral Xel stood from his command chair, his exoskeletal frame towering over everyone on the bridge. "Battle stations. Deploy in Thalidian formation. All ships channel power to forward shields." Ilara watched as the Alliance ships moved with practiced precision, forming the defensive pattern they had drilled countless times. The Scorpius Armada, biomechanical vessels controlled by a hive consciousness, had been raiding Alliance territory for nearly a year. Their technology was superior, their tactics ruthlessly efficient. So far, the Alliance had managed only to fight them to a standstill. The enemy ships accelerated toward them, arranging themselves in a spear-like formation that Ilara had never seen in the tactical briefings. Something cold settled in her stomach. "Admiral," she said, stepping forward, "they're using the new approach. I recommend we—" "Your recommendation is not required, Captain," Xel interrupted without even looking at her. "The Thalidian formation has proven effective in our last 3 engagements." Ilara fell silent as the first volley of energy weapons lanced out from the Scorpius fleet. The Alliance shields held, but just barely. The Scorpius formation suddenly split into 3 distinct groups, each attacking from a different vector, finding gaps in the Alliance's carefully arranged defenses. Within minutes, 3 Alliance ships had been disabled, their hulls breached, crews evacuating in lifeboats. The bridge of the Intrepid was chaos, officers shouting reports as systems failed across the fleet. "Our formation is compromised," the tactical officer reported. "The Scorpius are targeting our command and control systems specifically." Admiral Xel issued orders rapidly, trying to regroup his forces, but Ilara could see it wasn't working. The Scorpius had adapted to the Alliance's standard tactics. "Admiral," she said firmly, this time moving directly into his line of sight. "Permission to offer a strategic alternative." The Admiral's compound eyes fixed on her with annoyance, but another explosion rocked the ship, and his mandibles clicked in resignation. "Proceed, Captain. Quickly." Ilara immediately accessed the tactical display. "The Scorpius are using our predictability against us. They've studied our formations and know exactly how we'll respond." Her fingers danced across the controls, highlighting specific ships in the fleet. "We need to break pattern completely. I suggest we execute what we humans call a false retreat maneuver." The officers around her exchanged confused glances. The concept of strategic retreat was anathema to several Alliance species, particularly the Andronians, who considered it dishonorable. "Explain," Xel demanded, even as another Alliance cruiser reported critical damage. "We make them think they've routed us," Ilara said, outlining her plan rapidly. "Our ships scatter in apparent disarray, but actually move to these specific coordinates." She highlighted positions on the tactical display. "When the Scorpius pursue what they perceive as easy targets, we spring the trap and hit them from multiple directions simultaneously." Admiral Ktell's mandibles clicked rapidly as he considered. Alliance doctrine typically favored direct, straightforward confrontation, honorable combat where the superior force would naturally prevail. What Ilara proposed seemed almost deceptive. "This is not our way of war," he stated flatly. "With respect, Admiral," Ilara replied, "it's not about your way or my way. It's about surviving this encounter. The Scorpius have adapted to your tactics. They haven't seen ours." Another explosion rocked the ship, and the lights flickered. The damage control officer reported that 2 more Alliance vessels had been critically damaged. "Implement Captain Ray's strategy," Ktell finally ordered, his voice tight with reluctance. "All ships, execute scattered retreat pattern, code Epsilon." The Alliance vessels broke formation, appearing to flee in disorganized panic. The Scorpius ships, sensing victory, pursued aggressively. Exactly as Ilara had predicted, their formation stretched and thinned as they chased what they believed were vulnerable targets. "Now," Ilara called when the enemy had reached the perfect position. "All ships, execute convergence attack." The Alliance vessels suddenly reversed course and accelerated, catching the overextended Scorpius ships in a devastating crossfire. Caught by surprise, the Scorpius suffered heavy damage before they could regroup. For the first time since the war began, the Alliance had seized the initiative. "Continue the assault," Admiral Ktell ordered, his earlier skepticism momentarily forgotten as he watched the Scorpius fleet scramble to reform their lines. Over the next hour, the battle raged, but the momentum had irrevocably shifted. The Scorpius, unable to predict the now seemingly erratic movements of the Alliance ships, lost 13 vessels before finally retreating into hyperspace. As the bridge crew assessed the damage and casualties, Admiral Ktell approached Ilara. He towered over her, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the emergency lights. "Your strategy was effective, Captain Reyes," he acknowledged, clearly struggling with the admission. "Though highly irregular." "Thank you, Admiral," Ilara replied simply. In human military history, sometimes the most effective approach is the one your enemy least expects. Ktell's compound eyes studied her with new interest. "Perhaps there is something to learn from your species after all." He turned to address the bridge. "Set course for Alliance Station Delta. We must repair and regroup." As the fleet limped toward friendly space, the officers on the bridge began to look at Ilara differently. Not with the dismissive tolerance they had shown before, but with a newfound respect and curiosity. Ilara knew this was just the beginning. The Scorpius would analyze today's battle and adapt their tactics accordingly. The advantage she had gained would be temporary at best. If the Alliance was going to survive this war, they would need to embrace something that came naturally to humans, but was foreign to many of the older species in the galaxy: constant innovation. The real challenge would be convincing them that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology or physical capabilities, but in their unpredictability, their capacity to improvise, adapt, and overcome against seemingly impossible odds. Today had been just the first lesson: the human element. 2 weeks after the battle in the Cygnus Expanse, the repaired Alliance fleet orbited the gas giant Paraxis IV. The massive swirling storms on the planet's surface were reflected in the holographic tactical display on the Intrepid's bridge, where Captain Ilara Reyes now stood at Admiral Ktell's right hand. "Intelligence reports confirm the Scorpius fleet has rebuilt its numbers," the Admiral stated, addressing his senior officers. "They will attack again within days, possibly hours." Ilara studied the intelligence data. Since their last encounter, reports indicated unusual activity in Scorpius territory. Extensive communication between their high ships, movement patterns that defied previous behaviors, and new configurations to their weapon systems. "They're adapting," she said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "The false retreat won't work again. They're learning." Admiral Ktill's mandibles clicked in agreement. Captain Reyes' assessment is correct. The Scorpius collective intelligence allows them to rapidly analyze and counter new tactics. He turned to her. "You've earned the right to speak, Captain. What will humanity do in this situation?" All eyes turned to Ilara. In the days following the previous battle, her status aboard the Intrepid had transformed. The dismissive tolerance had given way to cautious respect. Now, with the threat of another Scorpius attack looming, that respect was tinged with hope. The Scorpius operate as a hive mind. Ilara began, stepping forward to manipulate the holographic display. Their strength is perfect coordination and shared knowledge. But that's also their weakness. They think as one entity, calculating, logical, and ultimately predictable once you understand their patterns. She brought up footage from previous engagements. Notice how they respond to new stimuli. They pause, analyze, then execute a perfect counter-strategy. There's a delay while the collective processes new information. She looked up at the assembled officers. Humans are different. We're messy, intuitive, sometimes irrational. We make what appear to be mistakes but can become advantages. We call it thinking outside the box. The Vulnarian tactical officer, Commander Zeth, flared his neck frills in confusion. Outside what box? There is no box in space combat. It's a metaphor, Ilara explained patiently. It means considering solutions that exist beyond conventional parameters. She looked at Admiral Ktell. "Sir, I propose we do something the Scorpius would never anticipate because it appears completely illogical. We hide the fleet inside the gas giant's atmosphere." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the bridge. "Impossible," stated the chief engineer, a gelatinous Medusan. "The pressure differentials would crush our hulls beyond 400 kilometers into the atmosphere." "Not if we reconfigure our shield harmonics to create a pressure bubble," Ilara countered. "We can use the electromagnetic storms as cover and mask our energy signatures in the planet's radiation belts." "And then what?" demanded Commander Zeth. "We hide while they destroy our colony worlds." "No," Ilara said, her voice firm. "We wait until they come looking for us, believing we've fled. When they approach to investigate the planet, we emerge from the storms, from multiple vectors, simultaneously, and strike before their hive mind can process and adapt." Admiral Ktell considered the plan silently, his compound eyes unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "The risk is substantial. If the shield modifications fail, we lose the entire fleet." "Yes," Ilara acknowledged. "But the Scorpius base their strategies on probability calculations. This plan falls so far outside probable actions that they won't have a pre-formulated response. We'll have precious seconds of advantage, maybe enough to cripple their command ships before they can coordinate a counterattack." For a long moment, silence hung over the bridge. Then, surprisingly, it was the Medusan engineer who spoke. The shield modifications would be complex, but possible. They conceded, their translucent body pulsing with thoughtful colors. "If we reroute power from non-essential systems and use the harmonic frequency Captain Rice suggests, we could survive for approximately 6 hours in the upper atmosphere." Admiral Ktell's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Andronian equivalent of a deep sigh. "Very well. Begin the modifications. We will implement Captain Ray's strategy." He fixed Ilara with his compound gaze. "I hope this human intuition of yours is as reliable as you claim." The next 12 hours were a flurry of activity as the Alliance fleet prepared. Shield generators were reconfigured, weapons systems modified to function in the gas giant's dense atmosphere, and personnel briefed on the unorthodox plan. Throughout it all, Ilara felt the weight of 30,000 lives on her shoulders. If her gamble failed, the Alliance would lose not just this battle, but possibly the war. As the fleet descended into Paraxis IV's roiling clouds, alarms blared warnings of hull stress and system failures. The massive gas giant welcomed them with turbulence that shook even the mighty Intrepid like a toy. Lightning bolts the size of cities crackled around them, occasionally striking their shields with enough force to make the lights flicker. Shield harmonics holding at 74%, reported the engineering officer. Atmospheric pressure increasing. Ilara stood beside Admiral Xel, both watching the external cameras as the fleet sank deeper into the churning storms, becoming virtually invisible to long-range sensors. The violent oranges and reds of the atmosphere engulfed them, occasionally parting to reveal other Alliance vessels similarly shrouded in the tempest. "Now we wait," Xel stated, settling into his command chair. They didn't wait long. 4 hours later, the sensor officer reported multiple hyperspace signatures approaching the Paraxis system. "Scorpius fleet detected," they announced. 62 vessels, including 3 high ships. "They're scanning the system, searching for us. Maintain radio silence," Xel ordered. "Let them come closer." On the tactical display, they watched as the Scorpius vessels methodically searched the system, eventually turning their attention to Paraxis IV itself. 2 Scorpius cruisers descended into the upper atmosphere, probing with their sensors. "They're using gravity sensors to check for mass anomalies," Ilara observed. "They're thorough. I'll give them that." "How long until they detect us?" Xel asked. "At their current depth and scanning pattern, approximately 12 minutes, replied the sensor officer. Ilara checked the fleet's status. The ships had been positioned in a rough sphere, hidden in different layers of the atmosphere. "We need to strike before they complete their scan. If we wait until they detect us, we lose our advantage of surprise." Xel nodded. "All ships, prepare to execute emergence pattern Delta on my mark." He turned to Ilara. "Captain Rice, this is your strategy. You may give the command." Ilara felt a surge of adrenaline as she stepped forward. "All ships on my mark." She watched the Scorpius vessels continue their methodical descent. Timing would be everything. 3, 2, 1, mark. Across the gas giant, Alliance vessels surged upward, bursting through the clouded layers like predators from the depths. The Scorpius scout ships were caught completely by surprise, destroyed before they could alert the main fleet. The Alliance ships emerged from multiple vectors simultaneously, catching the Scorpius fleet in a devastating crossfire. "Their response time is delayed," called out the tactical officer. "They're struggling to formulate a cohesive counter-strategy." "All ships, concentrate fire on the hive vessels," Ilara ordered. "Don't give them time to adapt." The battle that ensued was unlike anything the Alliance had ever experienced. The Scorpius ships, normally so perfectly coordinated, moved with uncharacteristic hesitation. Without their usual instantaneous response, they were vulnerable in ways they had never been before. The Intrepid shuddered as it took enemy fire, but for every hit they received, they delivered 3 in return. Across the battlefield, Alliance ships pressed their advantage, targeting communication nodes and command centers on the Scorpius vessels. "First high ship has sustained critical damage," reported the tactical officer. "Their coordination is deteriorating further." Admiral Xel leaned forward in his command chair. "Continue the assault. Show them no mercy." For 2 hours, the battle raged across the Paraxis system. The Alliance suffered losses, 5 ships destroyed, 7 more badly damaged. But the Scorpius fleet was devastated. By the time the last high ship attempted to retreat, more than 40 of their vessels had been destroyed or disabled. "Shall we pursue, Admiral?" asked Commander Zeth, his neck frills extended in the Vulnarian expression of battle readiness. Xel looked to Ilara, who shook her head. "Let them go," she advised. "Let them carry the story of this defeat back to their collective. Let them try to understand what happened here today." The Admiral considered this, then nodded. "Stand down from pursuit. Begin recovery operations for our damaged vessels." As the bridge crew carried out their orders, Admiral Xel approached Ilara. Despite his alien physiology, she could read something like admiration in his posture. "You were right, Captain Reyes," he said, his voice carrying across the bridge. "The unpredictability of human thinking, what you might call creativity, proved to be a weapon more powerful than any in our arsenal." He extended one of his upper limbs in a gesture of respect. "The Alliance has much to learn from humanity, it seems." Ilara accepted the gesture with a slight bow. "And we have much to learn from you, Admiral." This victory wasn't about human tactics alone. It was about combining our strengths. "Your engineers made my plan possible. Your warriors executed it perfectly." Tell clicked his mandibles in what Ilara had come to recognize as amusement. "Perhaps this is the true lesson of today's battle, Captain. Not that humanity is superior, but that together, combining the logic and discipline of the older races with the creative adaptability of humans, we are stronger than any of us could be alone." As the Alliance fleet regrouped and set course for home, news of their victory spread rapidly across subspace communications. For the first time since the war began, the Scorpius had been soundly defeated. More importantly, they had been outfought. On worlds across the Alliance, the story was told of how a human captain had turned the tide of war with what seemed like illogical, even reckless strategy, hiding an entire fleet inside a gas giant, only to emerge like ghosts from the storm to catch their enemy completely unprepared. In the months that followed, more humans were assigned to Alliance vessels and strategic planning divisions. The older species began to study human history, human art, human warfare, seeking to understand the unique perspective that had proven so effective against the Scorpius. And somewhere in the depths of space, the collective intelligence of the Scorpius hive analyzed their defeat, struggling to comprehend the seemingly random, illogical decisions that had led to their downfall. They had encountered many species across the galaxy, but none quite like humans, unpredictable, adaptable, and endlessly creative. It was the final lesson they would learn about humanity. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't superior technology or numbers, but simply a different way of thinking.